Well, it's episode 5 and we still aren't done with Blender. We spent the last 3 sessions getting our low poly model ready, and now we need to do a bit of work on the high poly model. In this video, we will be turning our geometry node sprinkles into real meshes, and then we're going to set up our high poly model with vertex colors so we can bake a material ID map, which I'll explain later, so don't worry. Load up your Blender file, and let's jump right in. Make sure you are in the main workspace, which is the layout option up here at the top. If any meshes are hidden, use Alt-H or / or click the eyes in the outliner to make everything visible again. Then, hide your low poly models by clicking the eye for that entire collection over here in the outliner. These high poly donuts may look great in Blender, but they're not quite ready for us to export and use as a real mesh. And that's because, assuming you did the 4.0 Blender Guru donut tutorial, we made all of these sprinkles using geometry nodes. This means that our sprinkles are only kinda sorta real, and they don't behave like normal meshes. So let's fix that. Geometry nodes are technically just a modifier. But if you come over here and try to apply the modifier to make them real, we get this, which is not good. So, in order to make them really real, we need to add another node into the Geometry Nodes pathway. Go to the Geometry Nodes workspace by clicking on it up here at the top. Then select one of the icing meshes, which should be what contains the Geometry Node modifier, and you should see the nodes down here in the bottom pane. Now, if you lost your donuts somewhere up here in the top pane, hover up there and hit Shift-C to return the view to the center, and then scroll in some more if you need to. Remember from last time that if your sprinkles look weird, you can hit N, go to the View tab, and change the clip start value. Okay, now down here in the Geometry Nodes pane, move the last box on the right over to the right a bit more to make some space for a new node. Then hit Shift-A and select Instances, Realize Instances, and drop it right here in between Join Geometry and Group Output so that it looks like this. Now that we have that Realize Instances node, we can go ahead and apply the Geometry Nodes modifier for this mesh. Recall that modifiers can be found over here on the right when you select the little wrench, or spanner if you prefer. And to apply a modifier, just click the little down arrow right here and select Apply. Make sure you do that on the Geometry Nodes modifier and not on a different modifier if you have more than one in the list. If you have other modifiers, just leave them alone for now. After applying the Geometry Nodes modifier, you should see the entire node setup disappear because we've turned all the sprinkles on this one donut into actual meshes. Now we need to repeat these steps for all the other donuts. Select another icing, make some space between the last 2 nodes in the bottom pane, then hit Shift-A, Instances, and Realize Instances. Drop it between the last 2 nodes, and finally over here on the right, click the little down arrow on the GeoNodes modifier and select Apply. Repeat this process for all 8 of the icings, or however many donuts you have that have sprinkles on top. Depending on how you made your donuts, adding a Realize Instances node to one icing might also add it to another one, and you'll see that it's already there when you select that icing. This is totally fine. Just go ahead and apply the Geometry Nodes modifier over on the right-hand side. For donuts that don't have any sprinkles, you don't have to do anything, since they have no geometry nodes. If the sprinkles disappear when you apply the modifier, it probably means something isn't right in the geometry nodes. Ctrl-Z to undo, and try again. Make sure you are putting a Realize Instances node right here between the last 2 boxes. When you're done, go back to the Layout workspace and do a quick check by clicking on each icing to make sure all the geometry node modifiers have been applied. Now that all our sprinkles are real meshes, we no longer need those original 4 little sprinkles that are hidden away somewhere in the scene. So let's delete them. Instead of hunting for them in the viewport, we can easily select and delete them right from the outliner. Find your sprinkles collection, right-click on it, and select Delete Hierarchy. Repeat this for any other collections that you made with those single little sprinkles. When that is all done, you should still have a plate of sprinkly donuts. If not, use Ctrl-Z to back up. Make sure you added the Realize Instances node in your Geometry Nodes setup, and then make sure you've applied the Geometry Nodes modifier for every single icing mesh that has sprinkles on it. Now, in order to help us texture this model later, we are going to color code our sprinkles using vertex colors. And then we will bake this information into a material ID map when we get to baking in a couple more episodes. To accomplish this, we need to select groups of sprinkles and apply vertex colors to them. But we aren't quite ready to do that yet because all of the sprinkles are currently part of the icing objects, which means we can't easily select only the sprinkles to color them. There are several ways to fix this. The easiest way is to separate every single sprinkle from the icing, and this is what I did the first time I made these donuts. But there are literally thousands of sprinkles in this scene, which means doing it that way will create thousands of different meshes. And I'm worried that this might blow up your computer, especially if you are working on a lower-end system. So we're going to do this in a somewhat convoluted way instead, which should be easier on your hardware. And while this may take a little bit longer, the silver lining is that this convoluted way gives us a chance to learn about vertex groups. Right now, each icing, with its associated sprinkles, is one object. We're going to use vertex groups to differentiate which part is icing and which is sprinkles. In object mode, select one of the icings. Go to Edit mode, and with nothing selected, click on a single vertex of the icing. Go to Select, select Linked, and Linked. The icing should now be orange, while all of the sprinkles show as black, or whatever other color your vertices are set to. Now go to Data Properties by clicking the little green triangle icon over here on the right. Find the Vertex Groups box and hit the plus sign to add a group. Double-click on Group and name it something meaningful to you, and I'm going to use the oh-so-descriptive name Icing 1. Then click Assign, which assigns all the currently selected vertices to this group. Test it out by clicking on the Deselect button, and then the Select button here below the box. Now let's assign the sprinkles on this donut to a different vertex group. Hit A to select everything. With the icing vertex group still selected here in the Vertex Groups box, click on Deselect. Your sprinkles should now be the only things that are orange. Click the plus sign to add a new vertex group. Double-click on it to give it a name. I'm going with Sprinkles 1. And then click Assign to put everything currently selected, which are the orange vertices, into this new vertex group. Test it out again by flipping between Select and Deselect using these buttons here. Setting up these vertex groups will allow us to easily choose which parts of this object we want to select, and you'll see this in action in just a bit. But before we get to that, we need to create these groups for the rest of our donuts. Tab back out to Object Mode, select a different icing, and repeat the same process. In Edit Mode, click off to the side to deselect everything, then select a single vertex on the icing, and go to Select, select Linked, Linked. In Data Properties on the right, add a vertex group with the plus sign, double-click on the name to change it, and then click on Assign. Test that it's working properly by clicking on Select and Deselect. Hit A to select everything, deselect the vertices you assigned to the icing group, and now only the sprinkles should be selected. Click the plus sign to add a new vertex group for the sprinkles. Double-click the name to change it, then click Assign, and test with the Select and Deselect buttons. Repeat this process until you have given all the icings and the sprinkles for all the donuts their own vertex groups. I'm speeding this up since it's the same thing over and over. As you're doing this, it's important to be sure that all vertex groups have a unique name so that you can tell them apart. And you need to go ahead and assign a vertex group to the icing, even for donuts that have no sprinkles. If you find any existing vertex groups, just click the minus sign to get rid of them before adding the new ones. Once you've got all the icings and each donut's sprinkles assigned to a different vertex group, we are going to join them all together into a single object. This will help us in a few minutes when it comes time to select sprinkles across all of our different donuts. In object mode, hold down Shift and click on each icing until they are all selected. The last one you click should be light orange. If none of them are light orange, hold Shift and click on one of them again so that one is light orange and the rest are dark orange. Then hit Ctrl J. You should see them all become outlined in a light orange color. Tab into Edit mode and hit A. All of the icing and sprinkles should now light up. Check the Data Properties pane over here on the right, and you should see that all of your vertex groups are still listed. If you select a vertex group in that list and click on Deselect, you should see those vertices now are deselected. Okay, so we're going to use these vertex groups to select only the icings and then hide them so that we are left with only a bunch of sprinkles. Hit A so that everything is selected again. Select the first sprinkles vertex group and hit Deselect. Then select the next sprinkles group and hit Deselect. Keep doing that until all of the sprinkles have been deselected. Once you have only the icings lit up and none of the sprinkles, hit H to hide all the icing vertices. Now we are going to randomly select sprinkles, separate them into their own new object, and assign each group a different vertex color. To do that, go to Select and choose Select Random. What this does is randomly select vertices from among all of the available visible vertices. But for this example, it selects too many by default, since it is picking up vertices on basically every single sprinkle. If we change the ratio over here in the Options menu, we can change the number of vertices that are selected. I'm going to put the ratio all the way down to around 0.003, and this will select 0.3% of the vertices that are visible. It's hard to see in the video, but we now have one or two vertices selected on just a few of the sprinkles. This is a good start, but we actually want the whole sprinkle to be selected, not just a vertex or two. So now we go to Select, Select Linked, and Linked. You should now have a random group of sprinkles selected. If it's too few or too many, just back up with Ctrl Z and change the ratio. I want less sprinkles to be selected, so I'll first undo that, and then Select Random again, and this time I'll go with 0.001. Then I hit Select Linked, Linked. And I think that looks good. Now we're going to separate this batch of sprinkles into their own object. Go to Mesh, Separate, Selection. Tab to Object Mode and click on one of the newly grouped sprinkles to select just that group. In the Data Properties pane on the right, scroll down and find Color Attributes. Expand that window and then click the plus sign. It should populate with Color, Vertex, and Color by default. Click on the black box labeled Color, and then use the color wheel to assign a color, or choose hex and type in a number value if you know exactly what color you want, or you can use the eyedropper to pick a color from your screen. Note that this is not the color it's going to have in Skyrim. This is a placeholder only, so give it any color you want, and then click on Add. Now you probably didn't see anything happen in the viewport because vertex colors are not turned on by default. So go up here to the shader options, make sure that viewport shading is selected, and then click the little drop-down arrow. In this window, select Attribute. And now you should see your vertex colors on the objects. Now we repeat this process to randomly select another group of sprinkles to give them a different vertex color. Click on any icing and then tab to Edit Mode. The sprinkles we already colored are no longer part of this object since we separated them into their own object, so we don't have to worry about accidentally picking any of those again. To choose another random group of sprinkles from those that are left, we repeat the process from before. Go to Select, select Random, and change the ratio if you want more or less to be selected. I'm going to stay with 0.001 for this batch so that it selects only a few. Then go to Select, select Linked, Linked. Remember that you can Ctrl-Z to back up and redo the random selection with a different ratio value if you want more or less sprinkles to be selected. This looks good to me, so I'm going to go Mesh, Separate, and Selection. Tab to Object Mode and click on one of the sprinkles outlined in dark orange to select only the new set. In the Data Properties pane, click the plus sign for Color Attributes, then click in the box labeled Color and pick a different vertex color from before using either the color wheel or entering a hex value or the little eyedropper. And then click on Add. Now we rinse and repeat, as many times as needed to get however many different colored sprinkles you'd like to have. I'm going to make 6 different colors in total, and I'm going to speed up the video here since this is just repetitive. Object Mode, select an icing. Edit Mode, select Random, change the ratio as you wish, then select Linked, Linked. Mesh, Separate, Selection. Back to Object Mode, click on one of the highlighted sprinkles, then in Data Properties, click the plus sign, choose a color, and hit Add. Now I wanted my first 2 sets of sprinkles to be accent colors, like the red and silver metallic ones in my reference, so I wanted fewer sprinkles in those sets. But from here on out, I'm going to increase the ratio a bit when I randomly select vertices. This may all seem a bit tedious right now, but having a material ID map will come in really handy when we get to texturing. Material IDs will let us easily isolate different areas on the UV map so we can assign textures to just those parts. So we will be able to color the groups of sprinkles really quickly in our texturing software by just clicking on a couple of buttons. This will all make a lot more sense when we actually do it in our 3D texturing program. For now, you'll just have to trust me and follow along. You'll be glad you did. When you're done, your sprinkles should look something like this. And this is how the different colors of sprinkles will be distributed around on our final donuts. I will note again that these are not the final colors for our sprinkles. They are just placeholders, and we will create the actual colors, shininess, and so on in our texturing software. So we've got vertex colors on our sprinkles, and now let's do the same thing for the icing and the donuts. In my reference image, I have pink icing on these 2 donuts, so I'm going to join them into their own object and apply the same vertex color to both. To do that, I'll first select all the icings in Object Mode. Then I'll tab to Edit Mode, and don't panic here. Remember that we hid all the icing vertices so that we could isolate only the sprinkles. So hit Alt-H to get them back. And I'll click somewhere off in the workspace to make sure nothing is selected. I'll click a vertex in one of the icings that I want to be pink, hold Shift, and click a vertex in the other one that I want to be pink. Then I'll use our old standby Select, Linked, and Linked. And now we have both of the icings selected. Separate them into their own object by going to Mesh, Separate, Selection. Tab to Object Mode, click on one of the icings we just put into their own new object, and then assign a new vertex color, one that you haven't used yet, in the color attributes of the Data Properties pane. Does this sound familiar? Yep, it's basically the same thing over and over here. Select all the remaining icings in Object Mode. Go to Edit Mode and Shift select one vertex in each icing that you want to put into the same group. Select Linked, Linked, and then Mesh, Separate, Selection. Tab back to Object Mode, click on one of the selected icings, then in Data Properties, Color Attributes, click Plus, and assign a new color that you haven't used already. I am only making 3 different colors of icing for my donuts. You may want more than that, so just set up however many you want. The only thing you have to remember is that each thing you want to look different has to be assigned a different vertex color so that you can differentiate between them on the Material ID map. When you get to the last icing, just select it in Object Mode and assign the color. It's already in its own object group, so we don't have to do anything else. For the donuts, we're going to do the same thing, but first we need to make sure they are separated from the icing and the sprinkles. In Object Mode, hold Shift and click on each donut, not the icing, to select them all. Then go to Edit Mode and hit A to select all the vertices. Go to Mesh, Separate, Selection. Now each donut, each icing group, and each sprinkle group should be its own object. And you can see that over here in the outliner. I want to make a couple of my donuts chocolate, so I will go back to Object Mode and click Off to deselect everything. Then I will Shift select just those 2 donuts and use Ctrl-J to join them. Then I will add the color attribute over here in Data Properties, just like we've done over and over. For the rest of the donuts, I will Shift-click to select them all, Ctrl-J to join, and add the last color attribute. And whew, that was a long haul. But we now have vertex colors painted on different parts of this mesh. And this information will be baked into a Material ID map that will really help us a lot when we start texturing. One point of clarification here, since this is really easy to misunderstand. We have used vertex colors here on the high poly model so that we can make a Material ID map. We have not applied vertex colors to our low poly model, and we're not going to do that. So when we make our NIF from the low poly model, these vertex colors will not be there. They only exist on the high poly model, and they're only going to be used to bake the Material ID map, so none of this is actually going to be anything that gets used in the game. Alright, so now that we have donuts, icing, and sprinkles all with vertex colors, we need to separate and regroup things so that each donut, plus its icing and sprinkles, is a single object. We want to end up with 9 meshes for our high poly model, 8 donuts and 1 plate. Before we do this, we have to apply our subsurface division modifier on the donuts, or else it's going to break things in the next few steps. Remember that this is a destructive action, so be sure to save this file and/or make copies of the donuts in your collection before you do it. Once you have a backup made, go through the donuts in Object Mode, check that the subdivision settings are how you want, and apply the modifier. If you separated out some for different flavors, like I did here, then be sure you apply the modifier on them all. With that done, let's combine everything into a single object first. Then we can make use of the vertex groups that we set up before to quickly make each donut its own object. Click on the plate and hit H to hide it for now so that it's not in the way. Then select all the donuts, icing, and sprinkles. Hold Shift and click again on any object, such as the icing for this front donut, so that it turns light orange, and then hit Ctrl-J. Now we make each donut its own object. Tab to Edit Mode, click Off in the viewport to make sure nothing is selected. Then click on a vertex in the top donut and go to Select, select Linked, Linked. Now go to Data Properties and find your vertex groups. Click on the group for the icing that goes with this donut and hit Select. Also click on the Sprinkles vertex group that goes with this donut and hit Select. You should end up with one donut plus its icing and sprinkles all colored in orange, meaning that one donut is all selected. Now go to Mesh, Separate, Selection. This puts all of the vertices that were highlighted here, which is the entire donut, into its own separate object. Now repeat the steps to separate the next donut. Go to Object Mode and click Off to deselect everything. Select the remaining stack of donuts and tab to Edit Mode. Select one vertex on a donut, then go to Select, select Linked, Linked. Choose the icing and sprinkle vertex groups that go with that donut and use them to select those vertices. Then Mesh, Separate, Selection. Go back to Object Mode, click Off to deselect, and then rinse and repeat again. We've done a lot of that in this video. I'm speeding this up again here, so feel free to pause and take your time to get all 8 donuts separated into their own object that includes their icing and sprinkles. Be sure you do the same steps for the last donut, even though it feels a little weird to separate it since it's just one. But that will make sure that it connects the donut with its icing and sprinkles into a single object. Once you have all the donuts separated, go through your outliner and make sure it's organized properly. It's good to name things so that you know what's what. Just click on a name up there and edit it. Now at this point, I should note that you may have to unparent your donuts. If they show up nested under something else like this, you can see the torus listed here under donut 0.002, then select them all in the viewport and hit Alt-P, then Clear and Keep Transformations. Now you can see that my donuts have been separated out here in the outliner, although their names are all wrong, so we'll have to fix that. Go through each donut, one by one, and name it using a convention such as _HP to indicate that this is the high poly version. This is a good practice to get into, naming your corresponding high poly and low poly meshes similarly, such as donut 1 _HP and donut 1 _LP. In fact, this naming convention is required if you are going to use Substance Painter to bake your maps. For our workflow with XNormal, it doesn't matter so much, but it's still a good thing to do. And if you want to know more about doing this for Substance Painter, check out this great tutorial by AU instructor Dan P. If you've got extra things in your outliner, you can highlight and right-click to delete them. You'll want your final high poly model to include just the 8 donuts and the plate. With all of that done, let's save this file and take a break. I know this was a long and tedious episode, but I promise there is a method to my madness. Material ID maps can be super useful, and setting one up does not have to be nearly as painful as this, so don't be deterred from using them. For this particular model, we can blame all our troubles on those darn sprinkles. 2 final comments as we wrap up. I opted to use vertex colors to create material IDs, but note that there are other ways to do it. And as I mentioned earlier, if your computer can handle it, separating the sprinkles into their own meshes and using random select on the sprinkle objects instead of on individual vertices is a much faster way than the roundabout approach that I showed here. Next time, we will complete the rest of the steps needed to prepare for baking. And no, I don't mean putting our lovely donuts in the oven. Baking is the process of transferring details from our high poly mesh onto our low poly mesh. It's really cool, so I can't wait to show you how it works. I'll see you soon for the next episode. Bye!